All right, today we have Chad Prda here. He's running for sheriff of Dallas County. I'm Eugene Ralph. Happy to be with you, and we want to interview Chad and get to know who's running for Dallas County Sheriff. Right now we have Marion Brown, who's the current sheriff, and she is somebody that we want to replace. And we appreciate the fact that you stepped out here and threw your hat in the ring again, and this time we're looking for success. So in getting started, I'm just curious is what makes you want to run for this position?
There's a lot of reasons that I'm running for the office.
Okay.
And
what would you say are your top three?
Yeah, the main reason that I'm doing this is the dedication to serve. I started with the Sheriff's Department 16 years ago.
Okay.
When we started running and my campaign started gaining traction, it was made clear that I was going to be sent to Internal Affairs and terminated if I didn't stop running. Mm-hmm. And to me, that is one of the core reasons to run. If you care about something and you want to make it better, then you should be willing to put everything on the line. And I got tired of watching the department get pulled down. I got tired of watching people in the sheriff's office not running the department the way it should.
Okay. And
the exodus that is with law enforcement, with good officers leaving. We have 15, 20-year veterans leaving the sheriff's department.
Wow.
And it's because of the policies that have been put in place. You can sit down, you can do your entire career, you can put your head down, you can just work cases and not pay attention, mm-hmm. and you could be perfectly fine. Or you can stand up and actually try to better your community and better the department by stepping up and taking charge. Mm-hmm. And that was kind of the decision that was made for me. It was either leave law enforcement or step up and make it better. So we're going to try to make changes and make it better.
Okay. And so you've been running now for a few months, and the election now is, you're going to the general election, which will be November 3rd, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you are running as a Republican candidate?
I am.
Okay. And so what is it that you would say that is the core of who Chad Prda is that makes him want to do what he's doing regarding not just being a sheriff, but in driving you to do the things you do and the way you do it? What would you say is that thing or things that you, as far as what we describe as your foundational constitution? How would you describe that?
So the core value behind my decisions would be just pride, my honor, integrity, and patriotism. Okay. I truly believe in the Constitution. Okay. I truly believe in upholding the penal code. Okay. If I didn't, everything I did in my life would not be correct. Okay. I truly believe in family values and go to church, raise your children to be the best they can, mm-hmm. Support your wife, or support your husband, because not every officer is a male. Mm-hmm. But it's that core value and conservatism. Okay. You have to believe it, or you wouldn't be able to do this job.
Okay. In law enforcement, there's obviously a lot of consternation regarding how law enforcement applies its job, does their job when it comes to applying the law, I guess you might say. Because with anything regarding law enforcement, obviously there's discretion, and you have that right, and you have that ability to do that, and many of us who are on the receiving end, we're actually glad for that often, because there's times when we get stopped and we probably should get a ticket and we don't. But beyond that, when it comes to the issues that are being dealt with today, and there's an assumption in many people's minds that law enforcement oversteps its bounds, and we know that in some cases that does happen. What is your position as far as how those things get dealt with?
Well, and the political hot term right now is defunding police.
Right. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, we're going to get to that. But now I'm talking about just in general, when you have someone or some group of people within the department that are just not doing the job correctly, what are your answers to how that's dealt with? And when I say not doing the job correctly, I'm not talking about they just don't show up for work on time, but they do their work a little sloppy. I'm talking about it's having an effect on community relations as far as what you're doing. What answers do you have regarding that? How have you thought about that?
Well, I want to make sure I understand the question.
Okay.
It's officers overstepping their authority and intervening in situations that they shouldn't be in.
Okay.
Is that kind of the question? How are we going to address that?
I would say that, no, not necessarily, because there are times where officers overstep their authority. I know there's probably some direct protocols in dealing with that. My question has to do more with excessive force complaints. When somebody has a pattern of it. When I realize that as an officer, you're like I heard you say before, you are human beings. So people have to be realistic when they have expectations of people, but I'm talking more in line of you have an officer or a group of officers who has demonstrated over a period of years that they have excessive force complaints. Coming into the situation as a new sheriff, how would you approach that? Do you look at it just in black and white? Do you do some kind of investigation? What are your answers to that?
Okay. So, and using the excessive force over a period of years.
Mm-hmm.
As sheriff, what I'll say is my policies are going to make it so that cannot happen.
Okay.
I don't want to, now I can't speak for what's prior to me.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But if an officer has an excessive force allegation, we're going to investigate that, and we'll have an internal affairs department that will look into it. On top of that, law enforcement as a whole, if it's an allegation that is egregious enough, I may not even investigate it. I may ask the Rangers to come in and investigate it for transparency.
Okay.
And then once that investigation is complete, let's release that statistic. Let's release that information so that the public knows this is why this action was taken or no action was taken.
Okay.
So transparency has to be at the front of everything.
Okay.
Right now, law enforcement has a tendency to hold records. And what I would like to do is whenever I get a use of force complaint, the person that made the complaint is at the end of the investigation given all the information.
Okay.
So that they can see why we did what we did.
Okay.
Now, if an officer is in violation and uses excessive force, that is a sliding scale.
Okay.
Because excessive force could be a person was placed in handcuffs and didn't need to be placed in handcuffs. It could also be the officer used his ass baton when that was not necessary or did not stop the fight after the person submitted. Okay. So there is, excessive force is such a broad range. It depends on the level of offense. What I will say is if it is egregious, if there is bodily injury or anything like that and there was no need for it, the officer was completely in the wrong, they would be up for termination. Right. If it was the officer placed someone in handcuffs for 20 minutes longer than they should have been or something, and I would consider that minor. When you're conducting an investigation, if someone feels threatened and he puts them in handcuffs and then you can hear them on the body mic say they're not threatened anymore, well, you should have taken them off. Okay. That may be something where it's counseling, a negative put in their file so that we can generate that paper trail to see if it's a pattern, or a couple of days off. Okay. So there will be actions taken, but you can't say, oh, they're all going to be terminated. Gotcha. Now, the one thing I can say is during that investigation, if they're called into internal affairs or doing the investigation, and we find out that they lied, that they falsified a record, or they said something happened that didn't actually happen, and it was their intent was to falsify something, they'll be terminated immediately. Gotcha. And on the spot. That I won't stand for, because if you lie for something that small, what else are you going to lie for? Yeah, that's true. So there are some instances where it will be a direct termination, but use of force will be handled case by case and kind of on a sliding scale.
That makes sense. Okay, so you said that there were several things at the top of your list that you would like to do, and you talked about one of them. What would you say the second thing is?
So, and I've made it very public on Facebook. My intention with the Dallas Sheriff's Department, first I'm going to address morale.
Okay.
Right now there's an exodus in the department. We're losing officers. The attrition rate's higher than the hiring rate. So
Really?
we're losing veterans faster than I can hire.
Wow.
So before I can fix a sinking ship, I have to plug the holes.
Right.
So I'm going to fix morale to stop that exodus.
Okay.
Then from that point forward, we will start to bring in more officers.
Okay.
Then it won't be an increase in the budget, it'll just be replacing the ones we've missed.
Gotcha.
Once I have those officers, then I can start integrating back into the community.
Okay.
What I would like to see is Dallas Sheriff's Department personnel at every community event within Dallas County.
Okay.
I want to see Dallas Sheriff's Department personnel participating in basketball tournaments, in schools, in colleges. I'm not as an enforcement capacity. I would like to see officers going to schools to help with football after school, baseball after school, whatever extracurricular activity that officer is good at, let's get them involved.
Okay.
I want them at community centers. I want them, if a neighborhood is having a block party, I want my officers to be the ones to shut down the street and to intermingle, not as enforcement, but as part of the community.
Right.
I'd like to get to where we live in the neighborhoods we patrol. Sometimes that's not possible.
Right.
With law enforcement, as a detective, I would never be able to live in the neighborhood I
Right.
investigate. It just isn't safe for anybody. But it doesn't mean I can't live in the same county.
Right.
I would like to see my officers integrate in the community outside of an enforcement. That way we know where we need to go. And when officers show up, it's not an outsider to that community. It's someone that is integrated, that understands
Right.
how it works.
Okay.
A lot of officers throw around community policing, but very few are willing to actually go forward and get involved. I want to open up the department to the community. So there's plenty of community resources that can be brought into my department.
Okay.
I want to have pastors from local churches come in. I'm going to give them a day room. They tell me what days and how many hours they want. I will let them have the day room, and any inmate that wants to go see them can voluntarily go. I would rather that community leader reach the inmates, because me as the sheriff walking in, I'm not going to be able to reach them.
Right. Right.
But if I can get the community to now come into the jail, maybe we can give them some help.
Right.
And so bringing the community in, on top of the community aspect of it, I want to bring media in.
Okay.
I want to give every media outlet 2 passes.
Okay.
And those 2 reporters will be vetted and have to pass background checks, but they'll have access to the department. They'll have a swipe card that lets them get into Frank Crowley. There'll be certain areas, like they can't just walk into the jail,
Right.
but they will be able to walk up and ask our detectives direct questions.
Okay.
One of my chiefs will be assigned, their job is to answer media questions. So we won't have the delay anymore, because now they have a chief in the department that can answer questions. Statistics as far as arrests, releases, all of the jail statistics will be made public monthly and updated. I want full transparency. It's my opinion that the media is there to police politicians and law enforcement.
Okay.
And they are supposed to report all of the facts.
Okay.
So let's make it available to them. Let's put it out there. The community should know what my department's doing, because then it makes life easier for me. When I go before a community group or a community leader and they ask why, I can show them, here's the statistics as to why we're doing what we're doing.
Okay.
And for law enforcement, transparency is more important than ever.
I agree. I definitely agree with that. I think that the relational aspect of the officers who work in the departments, regardless whether it's sheriff or police or whatever, the fact that there's a connection between the communities is vital. And I think over the years, that's something that's broken down, and there's probably a whole host of reasons as to why that is. But in order to improve the situation, I think we need to kind of get back to some of that. That would definitely be a major issue, a major thing, I think, going forward that could be helpful to all of us. You said it was a third thing. Then what would you say that third thing is? Can you remember?
So the third thing is going to be changing a lot of our policies.
Okay.
And a lot of that's going to be interdepartmental. So right now, one of the policies is an officer within the department can't say anything bad about the department.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in the SOP. You cannot say anything bad.
Okay.
Well, what you're telling people is if you work for my department, then you give up your First Amendment right.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. Why do you think that was put in to begin with?
Because the sheriff's not doing their job.
Oh, okay.
They're worried about the employees coming out against them.
Okay,
Well, just because you work for my department doesn't mean you give up any rights.
you're right. Okay.
If, when I win in November,
Mhm.
if one of my deputies decides they're gonna run against me,
Mhm.
they won't be terminated,
Right,
okay? If I don't do my job, come tell me I'm not doing my job.
right,
If I do my job, that shouldn't be a problem.
right.
And that's what we need to get back to, that accountability.
Yeah, because actually, after all, as a sheriff, being an elected, you're what you call, you're the primary elected law enforcement officer, the one that's closest to the people.
It's the chief law enforcement in the county, and you answer only to the voters.
Wow. And that's something a lot of people don't think about.
Right.
Yeah, and you answer to the voters. You're not the police chief who's appointed. You're the sheriff.
The only person that the sheriff answers to are the citizens. The only person that can investigate the sheriff is the Texas Rangers.
Wow.
But it was established that way for that check and balance.
Okay.
The sheriff is over the municipalities.
Right.
As a detective, I worked many cases involving other departments and citizens.
Mm-hmm.
If there was a departmental shooting, the Bald Springs case,
Right.
we worked that for transparency.
Right.
The sheriff's department comes in, because they don't answer to city managers or mayors or anybody, it is all about the legal system.
Right.
We've just gotten away from that.
Right.
We have departmental policies that won't allow the officers to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
And we have, I guess, leaders right now that think it's better to suppress the Constitution than to enforce it.
Right.
And as sheriff, you should enforce the Constitution. Everyone gets a right, everyone gets a voice, regardless of whether or not you agree with it.
Right.
Your duty is to uphold that Constitution.
And I totally agree with that. I totally agree with that. One other question I have, Chad, is, before we close out is, probably a couple. One of my questions is, has to do with, I would say, because you mentioned several times about upholding the Constitution, and one of the big bugaboos I've had since this whole COVID thing broke was the trampling of our constitutional rights as citizens by government officials. Often, the police or the law enforcement apparatus is sort of in the middle of that, right? You're being told by those who are in positions, who are elected, politicians or whatever, to enforce edicts that are not necessarily constitutional. As the sheriff, what is your position on that?
So, and the example I like to give with that, if it goes against the Constitution, I won't let it happen.
Okay.
And that is across the board, and just period, I won't.
Okay.
When it came through Dallas County, shelter in place, and they shut down the churches,
Right.
I would have said, no, I'm not going to enforce that. You can make County Judge Jenkins can make the rule all he wants. I will not enforce it.
Okay.
I will leave it up to that individual pastor. They know their church.
Right.
They know whether or not they can social distance. They know their community better than law enforcement or the government ever would.
Right.
So I would leave it up to that pastor. If that pastor wants to close, he can.
Right.
If he wants to practice social distancing, and if he stays open, as long as he's social distancing and not putting general population at risk, they're wearing masks and they're doing social distancing, stay open. There are some small congregations, but the government should not make that decision. The government should set the broad stroke rules.
Okay.
And what I can say is, if I was sheriff, Dallas County would not have closed churches. I would have left it up to those individuals. And the sheriff is the only person that can do that.
Okay. All right. And it was one of the questions I had. It had to do with just on the tip of my brain. But anyway, the whole COVID thing regarding the jail, because you and I talked about this some time ago. And right now, you just kind of share with the audience a little bit about what's going on with the Dallas County Jail in regard to COVID-19 and how you would do things differently from the current sheriff.
Okay. There's a ton of issues within the jail right now. When COVID first came to Dallas, it was reported there were 4 cases in the Dallas County Jail.
Okay.
One of them was a positive case, and the other 3 were asymptomatic.
Okay.
So they carried the disease, but not the symptoms.
Okay.
The positive case was found out at Parkland. So he left the jail, he went to Parkland, he was tested for it, and they found out he had it. But he did all that contamination to get there. He was brought back and placed in a single cell, which is fine. I would have placed him in a single medical cell myself. The other 3 that were in the tank with other non-positive inmates and officers were left there for 3 days.
Wow.
After that 3rd day, that entire tank was transferred throughout the Dallas County Jail system. That tank was then sanitized.
Whoa.
What they should have done is come in, sanitize the tank, and quarantine it. It should have been made a negative pressure, no more in and out of that tank. And
Right.
if you're released, you bring that person out. And you release them with the understanding, look, you could have been exposed to COVID, you need to go to the hospital.
So when you say tank, you're talking about the holding cell, right?
No, I'm talking the housing location,
Okay.
where there were another 64 inmates total in that tank.
Wow.
They were all contaminated and then transferred around. That's why we have so many COVID instances within the jail.
Okay.
So mismanagement of that one caused it to spread throughout the jail. The other thing is inmates that were brought in were not quarantined.
Wow.
I would have quarantined new inmates for 14 days. That way I could stop the infiltration of COVID into the jail.
Right.
None of those, they weren't quarantined.
Right.
So they were brought in, you don't know if they're gonna test positive once they're in. Then PPE has not been given out.
Right.
It is now, I think. Right now, they give one surgical mask, not KN95, one surgical mask to inmates a week. And officers are giving them on a more regular basis, but they have to ask for them. And that's been a long fight to get to that point. Initially with COVID, I offered to donate a pallet full of N95 masks, and the sheriff turned it down.
Really?
I went through Dallas County Commissioner's Court, and they told the sheriff to accept them. She still turned them down. She then sent memos that said they're fully equipped, they have everything they need, but the very next purchasing month, she's trying to buy enough masks for the whole department.
Wow.
Come to find out, officers were not given masks. So we had to actually stand out in front of the jail and hand officers a mask individually because they were not given KN95 masks.
Wow.
She did end up giving these plastic masks, which is a safety hazard for officers because it was a 3D printed hard plastic mask. It did not protect against COVID. It clearly said that on the box, don't use this for COVID. But it was a hard plastic mask that if you put it on, it's a safety hazard because if it gets hit or if it gets broken, it can be sharpened. You don't take that stuff into a jail.
Right.
So they stopped using those. As of last week or last month, the policy was put out, inmates get a surgical mask, and these are inmates that they have no choice, they have to be there.
Right.
They cannot choose their housing location, they cannot move. So you have to supply them with equipment. She's still not giving them the N95 mask.
Wow.
And those individuals did not choose to be there of their own free will. They're arrested.
Right.
So we have to take care of them.
Right.
Officers are not given KN95 masks. And that is the biggest thing I falter for. You're not upholding your duty to protect the inmates in your care, and you're not upholding your duty to protect the officers that work for you and are coming in and out of that facility, going back home to their families. It needs to change. We need to stop viewing inmates and officers as expendable and start viewing them as investments.
I totally agree. Well, you can hear that listening to Chad, you can hear his heart. You can hear that he is someone who has a service heart, and that's what we look for. We look for people who are constitutionally bound to the job they take when they take an oath to the Constitution here, anywhere in America, but especially here in Texas. And we look for people who have a set of principles that guide them when they choose to serve in office. So my closing question would be, most of us, we know a lot about the current sheriff and what we like, well, those who like her and those of us who don't, and what we don't like. I would say, in a nutshell, how would you describe we're doing a contrast here. How would you contrast yourself in a couple of sentences to the other sheriff is the reason why voters should vote for Chad Prda?
Because my administration will be run with the expectation that we're there to serve, that we are to uphold the Constitution, we are to uphold the penal code, and that is it. Take politics out of the office, just do your job, and just serve the community.
Amen. And that's exactly what we want from a sheriff. Take politics out of the office. Thank you, brother.